In this video, we're going to look at nominating candidates. In a typical two-party system, electoral competition will happen between candidates from, in this case, the red party and the blue party. Each one will have their own base of support in the extremes of their party. However, there will be a lot of persuadable voters in the middle. In a typical competitive district, these would be called independent voters, moderates, or swing voters. To be successful, the candidate will need to capture the median voter. That's the voter in the middle. That will give them 50% plus 1 of the popular vote and allow them to win the district. This is the dynamics in a two-party system with a competitive district. You need to work for that median voter in order to win election. However, first you need to get nominated. The red party and the blue party will need to nominate their own candidates. And that happens through a primary election. A primary election is a preliminary election that happens before the general election. It is the opportunity where each party chooses their own candidate. It is a public election. Competing for the red party, any candidate that wants to be nominated can enter the primary. The one with the most votes will get elected and they will proceed to the general election. Now there are two types of primary elections. There are open primaries where anybody, including independents, can participate. You just have to pick which one. You can either participate in the Republican primary or the Democratic primary. Or there can be closed parties that are restricted to people who register as either Republicans or Democrats. Closed primaries will only be restricted to those party affiliations. Now, it's an important distinction to note. The primary process for presidential elections is slightly different than this one. Here's how it might work. Let's say the blue candidate has their party nominated, but the red party has yet to do so. So they will have a primary election where any candidate that wants to win the nomination can enter. The primary voters in this case are not the full electorate, but the very narrow slice of electors that belong to that party, or at least have indicated their party affiliation on their registration. The competition will be very extreme because these voters, again, represent a very small portion of the general electorate. The candidates will be driven to the extremes. Eventually, one of those candidates will be successful. They will win, and they'll have the opportunity to participate in the general election against the blue candidate. Now, this is where they might have to shift strategy. In the primary election, you're only focused on your party base, the extreme members of the electorate. In the general election, you need to capture that median voter. So it might cause a candidate to shift their strategy and become more moderate. It's sometimes called running to the center. In the primaries, you're focused on extreme voters. In the general election, you need to capture those voters in the middle. Just to recap, before a candidate can be selected to run for their party, they must first compete in a primary election. It is a preliminary election that is held before the general election. It's to choose candidates. The voters, often called the party base, are more extreme than those voters in the general election. Sometimes a candidate will win the nomination with only 5% of the electorate. Turnout is very low in these. As a candidate, you'll have very different strategies. In a primary election, you want to appeal to the extremes and your hardcore party supporters. In the general election, you need to cast a much wider net and appeal to those persuadable voters in the middle.